Hello, friends. Welcome back to Plant-Based Doctors, and have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Khalsa, or better known as Dr. Siri Chand, on her website. She is a very, very knowledgeable doctor. We're going to talk about her internal medicine journey, then her integrative medicine journey, then her whole food plant-based journey, and how she is focused, subspecialized in Ayurveda now, and just helping all of us live healthier, better lives. Welcome, Dr. Siri Chand.
Oh my goodness, what an honor, and so excited to be here as a guest, and nice to meet everyone.
Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey? Because it's so unique. We don't hear a journey like yours very often.
Yeah, it is. I even sort of marvel at how unique it's been. Sometimes it's like, wow, that wasn't very modest, but I have had a really unique journey. There's no doubt about it. And what happened for me is I grew up in Northern Virginia, which you may have some regional listeners, and I attended a sort of magnet school, if you will. It's called Thomas Jefferson. And this school has a very strong emphasis on science and math and achievement. And most everyone from that school goes on into medicine or science
Oh, wow.
and the arts. Yeah, so, but it's a pressure cooker. It's a magnet school. You have to apply to get in. This would have been in the 90s or late 80s when I applied. And by the time I was in my third year of medical school, I was already pretty decently burnt out. I mean, undergraduate. I was already pretty decently burnt out. And being pre-med, you have a lot of stress and a lot of like internal journey you're taking to try to do your very best. And I had hit a wall and I wasn't doing well in one of my classes, and it created a lot of internal tension, which in turn impacted my physiology. So I went to the student health clinic and I walked in, and I always say there's like perfect timing. The perfect person was there, even though in hindsight, like, what was he thinking? It was probably an intern or a resident, a doctor younger in their career, who met me and said, oh, phenobarbital would solve all your problems.
Okay.
Like, mind-boggling, right?
Wow.
Like, what? Like, well, needless to say, I was always a bit of a maverick. And I pretty much walked out of that office thinking, like, that is wholeheartedly, absolutely the last thing I could possibly need right now. And fortunately for me, I always did have this little independent streak of like, well, yes, and maybe you think that would be useful for me, but I'm going to try and find another way. So I wandered off to a local store, a metaphysical bookstore, and I landed in there and I happened to find an Ayurvedic cookbook. And it was a lifestyle book and an introduction to Ayurveda. And I say that from that point forward, I really had two knowledge pathways that was important to me. So this would have been 1991. So now we're almost 30 years into this journey. And so what I did is, I guess I was a little bit of a self-starter. I took a pause. I took a semester off school and I did a self-healing protocol. I looked at some counseling. I learned yoga. I learned Tai Chi and Qigong. I started eating.
Semester off.
Yeah, exactly. I played a little pool too. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, but and I learned to self-heal my digestion way before it was anything really quite as popular as it is now. And I did that primarily through a whole foods, plant-based elimination diet. And I healed up, and at the end of that journey and at the end of undergrad,
Well, before you go on, just to interrupt, were you having stomach issues, or can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the way it showed up for me is like my whole systems just started shutting down. And in Ayurveda, I could explain it a little better, but in the Western vernacular, it was just somatic disorder. Like, my cycles were abnormal. I had terrible digestion. I couldn't digest anything. Like, as soon as I'd eat, I'd be in the bathroom. It was one of these like really severe functional bowel diseases. So in internal medicine, we learn about these functional bowel diseases that actually the NIH has some studies showing, they're pretty significant impairment on quality of life, yet there's no discrete, easy treatments. There are newer pharmaceuticals that have, of course, their own side effect potentialities. So I really was miserable. Like I was
Just the whole
really,
irritable bowel spectrum.
yeah, just the whole irritable bowel, and my cycle stopped, and
Okay,
it was,
continue.
yeah. So really, like from a medical standpoint, it's kind of fascinating because my body has always been my teacher. It's always taken me deeper into my understanding of medicine. I always joke that if I had this sort of radiant digestive tract that could just eat anything and handle any amount of stress, I would never have gone on the journeys that I've been on, because I would have just cruised on through into medicine. And, you know, I'm sure I would have been inquisitive, but I never would have done these journeys into other healing systems, because really a lot of the diseases that sit in the category of functional or somatic or idiopathic have solutions in these other systems or in lifestyle changes. And so between the two, I've always just had this body that's very particular. And so anytime the body
I share that too, but we're going to talk
yeah,
about your
exactly.
story. Wow.
Right. So anytime my body's off on some tangent, it means I'm, you know, whatever it is that's going on, it means usually I'm going to be learning something new. It's a really funny way to look at it. But, you know, and by now I have a decent amount of expertise about everything across the gamut. But when I finished undergrad, I wanted to be a naturopath or an acupuncturist. I had realized, like, wow, this allopathic system really wasn't as much focused on prevention and the sort of origins of disease. In many ways, we are typically looking at something once the disease has manifest, and it's just not built into our practice or how we practice to be able to have time for that. It's not that physicians, allopathic physicians, don't value it. It's that they're just, the practice model hasn't been created.
Right, the care versus cure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I marched on off across the world, spent some time in different places, and
before med school.
Before med school. So I took 4 years off. And in that time, I looked at other healing systems, naturopathy, Ayurveda, acupuncture, chiropractic. I looked at all of them. But ultimately, I felt, oddly enough, that maybe I could make a positive contribution by having this awareness and being in the allopathic system. So sort of begrudgingly, I circled back and did the MCATs and did some more study and got into medical school, did my internal medicine at Mayo Clinic. And then I moved west when I finished. So we all know, for the listeners that are in medicine, and for those that aren't, I'll just highlight, you know, you have really between 7 and 10 years where you really have no free time. I don't know how it's structured now. This would have been 98 to 2005 for me. And through that training journey, there was really not time to continue to learn the other things that I so cherished and so loved. And so when I graduated, I said, okay, I'm going to move west because it's a little more progressive. There's more teaching, there's more mentoring. And so I ended up getting connected with the University of Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine and started just a longer term journey with them in terms of contributing content and teaching and ultimately doing the fellowship that they offer there, which was a fantastic sort of full circle moment for me. But in the interim of finishing residency, I also went on to study Ayurveda for 3 years. So I actually took another, almost like a fellowship. I took 2.5 years to study directly, and then another couple of years to sort of integrate. And that included time in India as well as in the US. And then I studied yoga and Reiki. So really, I kind of had my feet, I'm a Gemini, I like to joke. I've really had my feet in both worlds all along. And so, so then
This is so fascinating. You took like Ayurveda and you took regular medicine, and then you just kind of combining everything. Okay, keep going. I'm so
yes.
excited.
So let's see here. So so I finished this, and there's a lot of undercurrents and difficult moments, but this is the high view here. And so I finished the Ayurvedic training in 2014, and I went to work I had been doing hospice and palliative medicine because I really wanted to try to find a model where I could be with people more than 5 or 10 minutes. for whatever the reason, however it is I'm built, those short visits just didn't land right for me. And so I ultimately went back to the Ayurvedic training when I had been doing hospice, and I finished that, and I thought I'd really like to work with people who aren't at the last portion of disease. So I like to say I sort of bit the bullet and went back into primary care and worked for a large national company, and in part had been tapped by them to help bring in or through their integrative medicine model. However, nobody's really fiscally ready for reframing the whole model. And so I was there for 4 years, I think. And I finally just did a hard stop. I said, I really want to step away and create curriculum and content for people that I know they would like, I know they would need, that really sits in these foundations of lifestyle medicine, which actually have all kinds of foundations in Ayurveda. Literally anything in lifestyle medicine can be found in Ayurveda. And at some point, I'd like to share a quote here. Let me see if I can find that super quick. It's from Charaka. So there are great teachers, 3 great teachers in Ayurveda, and the textbooks are huge volumes of information. Like there's no lack of quality of trying to find information. And this is a quote from Charaka. It says, health and disease cannot be predetermined, and human life can be prolonged or increased by paying attention to lifestyle. Now this quote is over 2,000 years old. And so it just tells us that humanity has actually been thinking about the same things and circling around and reworking it and redefining it since probably the beginning. And so, it's fascinating for me to think about how we can bridge these ancient knowledge systems as a lighthouse or a signpost for us as we navigate through the modern time, where we have variables that they didn't, most particularly the digital age and screen time and just the entire flux of our lives being integrated with computers, screens, iPhones, iPads. That really didn't exist, though Ayurveda can talk about the impact to the body from that and possible solutions because it has a timeless quality. So at any rate, that's kind of how long story, but that's kind of how it's all been woven together to get me where I am today.
Oh my gosh, I want more details because believe it or not, I know nothing about Ayurveda. Even though I'm Indian, that doesn't mean anything that I have any knowledge or expertise.
Yeah.
So, I just want like nuggets and nuggets.
Yeah. So one of the things that
you want to center on stories of like patient impact, that maybe would be the best way to teach the principles of Ayurveda. Like, what's
I'm happy to do that.
Story that stands out the most in your mind without sharing anything that's HIPAA related?
Yeah, exactly. So I have a story that probably was one of the most impactful situations. And again, knowing that your audience may have kind of all sorts of different backgrounds, physicians are real people. And when we encounter patients who have had a large amount of imbalance or disease burden, meaning their bodies have been through a lot, it impacts us. We're not immune to it. Though we may have to keep a composure and a focus in the visit, we are impacted. We might mull over the case in our evening routine. We might fall asleep or dream about something we might have done better or differently. So as it would happen, I think probably it was in part from my Mayo Clinic training, which is primarily a concierge model. For the most part, they take insurance, but it has a more of a direct pay or concierge model. So I primarily, in my residency, saw patients who were geriatric. So I developed a very particular niche between hospice and Mayo for the extremely complex older patient whose body was going through a lot. And so while my colleagues often had simpler panels for whatever the reason, my practice was often punctuated by a full day of very complicated patients. And as an aside, just a small observation, the practice model doesn't account for complexity in terms of how visits are structured. So, if you have a physician who seems a little flustered and they are in a practice, this is just my public service announcement, where they're seeing a lot of more complex patients and you're seeking them out, particularly because they're integrative. Particularly integrative providers tend to have more complicated patients owing to the individual having a harder time solving their problem elsewhere. Chronic issues, things that don't have easy solutions. So, so that having been said, sorry, my voice is hoarse. Give me one quick sec here. Okay, so so as it would happen, I ended up having a lot of patients who were very complicated and over 65. And occasionally, I would have circumstances where someone really had just never been given any of the principles of lifestyle medicine. So the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine are as follows: 150 minutes of moderate exercise, 8 hours of restful sleep, plant-based diet, not smoking. I say removal of intoxicants because it's a more broad term. Stress reduction, and social connection, loving connection. So I had this particular patient, and she, we'll say she was in her mid-60s, and she came to see me initially in a wheelchair. And she had a list of medical conditions from peripheral neuropathy, diabetes, a monoclonal gammopathy, I could keep going. Neurologic, hematologic, gastrointestinal, like literally every organ system. And this individual was just really excited about learning lifestyle and was so amazed that there was a doctor who could actually give some sense of, yes, do this, which was such a travesty in my heart, because here is somebody who probably would have been receptive to it years prior to that, but had a more traditional mindset of, I want to follow the instructions from the doctor. And so, of course, this individual's on a number of pharmaceutical things to address the chronicity of these other conditions. So we sat down in the first visit, and I said, well, listen, we've got 30 minutes. You're an incredibly interesting, lively person. There's a lot of medical history here. I'm not sure what I can do from an integrative standpoint, because that's a whole nother conversation. Integrative medicine is really more for a holistic approach once the disease is present, after you've looked at lifestyle. So there's this component of lifestyle medicine within integrative medicine. It's sometimes confusing, all the terminology. So I said, let's look at your lifestyle. And I could think about it from an Ayurvedic standpoint. What was the driver for some of the sources of all her imbalance? And I knew in my heart of hearts that her digestive capacity was really taxed. And it was causing a lot of disruption. And as we've learned, the microbiome and leaky gut and digestive capacity does turn out, even in the Western model, to be pretty impactful. And to optimize that is to really bring this quality of health. So we just did a very basic, I think we did Essel signs or forks over knives. We did one of the meal plans. I also like Joel Fuhrman's Eat to Live. And so I would use one of those 3. I'd use the Eat to Live plan, the Esselstyn's plan, or the forks over knife eating plan, or a meal planner. And I would say, listen, you can get started on a whole food plant-based diet. And I was never salt-free, oil-free completely. That's to each their own in terms of that journey. But I use oil and salt, and I wasn't as rigid with patients. But some people really took all the way, oil-free, salt-free, no processed food, all plant-based. Well, I got a call 4 weeks later, or an email, I think it was, just a couple of little questions. And there was some medication refills and, okay, yes. And I said, well, let's schedule a visit in the next couple of weeks. Let's give it at least 6 weeks, because that's usually my cutoff, was 6 to 8 weeks to just determine, are you making an impact with these new decisions? Well, this patient came into the office walking.
Wow.
Walking, and probably 40 pounds lighter.
In 6 to 8 weeks.
in 6 to 8 weeks. And the thing
Wow.
is that this person really doubled down. They did the protocols, they followed it to a T. There wasn't snacking, there wasn't treats. But as soon as she started to see this lever of change happening, she said, I'm all in. I'm so invested in keeping up with this protocol that she really just dialed it in. It's a bit of a discipline to really do these eating plans. And of course, I always say when I do podcasts, and these are educational, informational conversations, and not meant to replace a conversation with a clinician. There's, the most valuable route is to find someone who will dial this in for you particularly. But she continued to accelerate in her health and reversed many of the chronic conditions that she had.
That's wonderful.
And, people think that when they hear Ornish speak, or when they hear some of these sort of luminaries in the lifestyle and plant-based community speak, they think these stories, they can't, no. I mean, yes, there's one person, but when people really went into the lifestyle pieces, they worked on their stress, they looked at their sleep patterns, they looked to see if they were socially isolated and got counseling if they needed it. They looked at movement, if they were oddly enough, I rarely had smokers as patients. They'd already done that work. But still, if you're a smoker, it's a meaningful thing to look at to see if you can stop. And they would look at those 6 things, and boy, whatever was chronic would start to shift and change. And the epigenetics of how the tissues are maintaining their disease states would be transitioned. And so we know tissue regenerates itself. Nothing is completely static. Molecules are being replaced. Energy of the system is shifting. And so that was probably one of my most remarkable stories. But I have many smaller, tangential stories of people who were able to transform. But what really began to frustrate me is that once I had seen one of these sort of really miraculous transformations, I knew that I wanted to be able to make that accessible for more people. And the difficulty in the way that the allopathic model is currently structured is that it's very difficult to have that much time. So then I had thought about doing a group visit model, which I'm a huge fan of, but the company I was with wasn't ready. They just were not ready, which is just crazy because you can bill and you can educate, and the groups, synthesis.
With each other, yeah.
Yeah, it was so much value. The group visit is like, to me, it should be a no-brainer as a way to deliver lifestyle concepts. So I decided that one of the things I was going to work on was a clinic that was primarily group visit based. And right before COVID, we were this close to signing the lease and creating the practice model. Now, mind you, this is a group visit model, so there's really no arc for development of this through this COVID time. And I'm so grateful, for the record, that we didn't sign the lease, because here we would have been with an empty building, or it was a larger space because we were going to do yoga, mindfulness, cooking classes, stress reduction, obesity care. I was really excited about it.
You're going to provide like everything.
Yeah, well, exactly. And my thought is that if the lifestyle care, this lifestyle center could be staffed by a physician, we're not diagnosing or treating, but we're a resource for community physicians who want to have a place they can send their patients, where they know there's not going to be a lot of, and I can get pretty out there, as you can imagine. Like I can get as out there as anybody, but I also see there's a very practical and pragmatic way of approaching chronic disease and prevention that really gets to the basics. I've never been a big fan of this superfood or this particular fasting style. It's really ultimately a journey for each person, and to have this lens of awareness, did that support me towards balance or away from balance, and becoming more and more attuned to that, so that intuitively the decisions that you're making don't require guidance, that you are informing yourself of, okay, reaching for that third XYZ, or going back to this relationship, or going back into this, varying situations isn't wholesome or nurturing for me. And in Ayurveda, we know that the internal world and the external world are very intricately linked. That's the best way I can explain it. There's an explanation for how heat affects us, how heat in someone's words affects us, how a sharp personality affects us, how the food we eat affects us. And we don't ever think about such subtle, small elements having an impact on us as individuals. But in Ayurveda, it's very nicely articulated, and you begin to develop this awareness of the world around you that's very powerful. And so the training and studies that I've done in Ayurveda have been the most transformative for my personal health. And I've been very lucky that I haven't had a significant Western diagnosis that required profound intervention.
Can you like define Ayurveda for us?
Sure. So it's very vast, but in essence, Ayurveda means the science of life. So that's the literal translation. But Ayurveda is a process where, and I always like to say, you know, the quote that I provided earlier is several thousand years old. So for many millennia, humanity in the West, and you know, you might have a slightly different background, but let's say for families that don't have connections to South Asia or these other healing traditions, there's the Western, you know, Hippocrates and the botanical sort of formulations that went on through millennia, right? And so there was this knowledge base of, what's that? All right. So we think about these knowledge systems of where did the foundation for our healing systems that we have now come from? So mostly in the US, it's from the Greek and Latin systems. And we have not incorporated traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda. But we have to understand that mankind, womankind, has been trying to address and deal with disease since the beginning. And so Ayurveda was initially an oral or spoken tradition where over millennia, the human condition was observed. And the impact of decisions was observed. So living in a cold climate, living in a warm climate with a certain body type. Then you would look at how a botanical might impact a person and how a pranayama or a yogasana, so these meditation, yoga and meditation techniques, how that might affect a person's core constitution. So there was, you know, enlightened sages who kept track of this through millennia, and it draws in large part from the Hindu faith, the Veda and Vedanta, these sort of philosophic traditions, but there was also sort of colloquial schools where people were learning, where knowledge was situated based on regional plans and regional activity. And then eventually these oral or spoken tradition was written and changed to books. And so actually, since we're in my office, I can show you. This is Sushruta Samhita. So I always tell people it's a voluminous collection of knowledge. And this is one of the three classics. They're all this big. The others are bigger than this. And if you were to pick up a classic, so this is one of the three, you would come into this and it would have the Sanskrit and then the English translation. So these have all been kindly translated from modern Sanskrit scholars. But initially the shlokas, or these sayings, were passed on in an oral or singing tradition with very particular rhythmic musical patterns. And then eventually, as paper and written word became more prominent, it began to be a transcribed process. And what's nice about it is that it's largely uninterrupted, meaning there hasn't been a large period of time where someone rewrote a classic book. This is what existed. The literal translations have not been as subject to some of the things that we find in the West, revisionary thinking, omission thinking, you know, sort of the philosophies of the 1400s and the 1200s and around the time of Jesus Christ. So we've seen this arc of how humanity heals. So Ayurveda developed, it's different than Chinese medicine. Of course, it's different from the Latin and Greek systems. It has a process where the trends of the body are understood based on the 5 elements. So earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And these 5 elements combine to give qualities of both mechanism and personality to a person. So you might have how those elements combined would make you a vata, pitta, or kapha. And so kapha is earth and water, pitta is fire and water, and vata is air and ether. And so these 3, and we're a combination of all 3. And so the way that these 3 doshas combine gives us a sort of a foundation of how our body's going to respond to the external world. So a kapha person has a lot of the earth element. They have thick bones, a wide face, beautiful skin, longer hair. I always think of the South Islanders, you know, these large Samoans with their gorgeous physiques, you know, that is a predominantly kapha person. And pitta people are sort of medium build. They have a little bit of fire in their eyes, you know, they're luminous. They're often doctors. Most doctors are pitta predominant. This fire quality gives us our intellectual capacity as well. It's this ability to digest life, information, food. And vata is air and ether, which is more the creative type or ballerina or the long distance runners. They have a thinner, lighter weight frame. And so based on these 3 types gives a very wide array of how we can navigate life, understanding that these internal trends exist within us and that the external world informs those trends towards balance or away from balance.
Wow. So do you go into like what a person is when you meet with a patient?
So I used to, as I had mentioned, I'm not in practice at the moment. So what I'm doing right now is I have a course for physicians on Ayurveda that I've been teaching, and it's 12 weeks long. And I do some modest lifestyle coaching and assessment, although it's not totally really set up to be an Ayurvedic assessment, but it's really for empowerment to learn Ayurveda for yourself. And it's largely been taken by physicians who have some interest in Ayurveda from their family background, or they've done more training in integrative medicine. So they know there's some real value here. So when I was in practice, I would have people drive hours to see me for the Ayurvedic piece because there's very few allopathic physicians taking insurance who know Ayurveda. So word got out, which meant I had even more complicated situations for what it's worth. So ultimately it just wasn't sustainable. And I realized that what I'd rather do, because people would come and ask me for the Ayurvedic evaluation, but it doesn't make any sense if you don't have a foundation of Ayurveda. Just people can give recommendations like, here, do this, but I never found that there was adherence to the recommendations if there wasn't understanding as to why I would say that. And largely everything I would recommend would be lifestyle based, but with a nuance to the particular doshic, to the particular pattern for the person. So there's really, you know, I wasn't really wanting to cross the lines with my license either. So it's a nuanced way of doing lifestyle medicine. But as I said, all of lifestyle medicine, even Dr. Ornish, there's some recent videos that I've seen that, and his recent book where he credits Swami Satchidananda, who's from Yogaville outside of Charlottesville, as his primary teacher for all of his programs. That the Swami taught him the breath work, the yoga, the mindfulness. He would never have landed in it without this teacher. And when they first introduced it in the 70s, no one took him seriously. So they changed the terminology around and sort of made it so that it didn't sound so esoteric or from another place, which was very unfortunate in a way to me, because I would love to have seen Ayurveda more present for what it has offered modern lifestyle medicine. So it's a little pet project of mine to sort of spark interest and awareness. And so that's why I've been teaching the physicians about it. It's not the deep dive that many might like to do, but it's also not always so pragmatic to leave practice for an extended period of time or step away from a busy clinical journey. So for me, that was kind of how it all came about, is that I realized like, wow, I really want to share what I understand from Ayurveda, but I need more time to do that. So that's how I decided to do more online. Well, I was going to do in-person teaching, and then COVID came. So then I pivoted to online teaching. So that's what I'm doing now, is really sort of self-activated journeys, meaning here's the information, so that I'm not really crossing the line with my license. Just giving people information like a book or like a course, and answering questions as they come up, of course, as well.
So do you have a course for just normal patients, not physicians as well?
I do, yeah, and that
Okay,
one's
so you
going to
have
come.
two courses, one for
Yes,
physicians
I
and one
do.
for normal patients.
Exactly. And so what happened was I realized that the Ayurveda was really, at this point, I'm probably at some point will have an Ayurveda course for everyone. But my mission, at least initially, was to translate Ayurveda in a way that physicians could use it for self-healing, because I feel that there's a very significant issue of imbalance due to the structure of our training and the stress, particularly for women, that we carry by, I don't myself have children, but I've seen it again and again. You know, you're a mom and you're trying to do all these things in your practice and, you know, move momentum forward in your interpersonal relationships. And at the end of the day, there's not enough of us to do all of those to the level we want to do them. So how do we manage that? How do we manage those stressors? And so burnout is a pretty big issue especially in primary care. It's almost 70% conservatively. And some of the studies might suggest even higher. And meaning if you sat down with a physician, 7 of 10 of them would say, I wouldn't do this field again, particularly in primary care. Some of these subspecialties aren't quite as demanding in terms of bandwidth. So they don't have quite those same rates, but generally across all of medicine, it's approximately 50%. And so I think there's a very genuine need for nurturing and nourishing ourselves, that Ayurveda has these wonderful techniques of building digestion with simple teas, nightly sort of spiced milk with turmeric and spices, eating foods that are very easy to digest, monitoring our stress levels, and participating in mindfulness, meditation, and yoga. Those simple things actually go a long way to reducing our stress levels and increasing resiliency. And so that was the reason I sort of branched into that direction. And then the course for everybody else is an 8-week plant-based journey, sort of I always like to say, you know, there's the journey of the nutrients before they're inside us, and the journey of nutrients once they're inside us. So sustainability, choosing your macros, mindfulness, food prep. So it's going to have a very practical quality of kitchen techniques, but also some science, as well as lots of recipes and meal prep and meal planning to make efficiency in the kitchen, reduce food waste. So I have a very cohesive vision that's based on the years of lectures that I've been giving at the Integrative Medicine Fellowship on culinary medicine and nutrition. So I had this long conversation with physicians. So I know a lot of the, what about this? And I can't do that. So I have been very fortunate to now have this little chunk of time to sort of try to solve some of those problems that I kept hearing, like again and again and again, like, oh, meal prep, I don't know how to do it, or it gets so boring, or the kids won't cook with me, or I'm a short order cook, or I don't know where to start, or it's too expensive, or, you know, the list goes on. And so I kind of have a sense of what those big pain points are. So I'm trying to develop something that really supports people to not have to feel so burdened by being in the kitchen. Because to me, it's our primary source of health. It's like this foundational place where we get to make a decision that supports our vitality and supports our longevity. And not just longevity, but longevity with vitality, like the blue zones and these cultures across the globe where you live to 100 years, but you maintain this wonderful functionality. Your body doesn't have to age the way we have been conditioned to think. And so So that's really what I'm working on now. And I'm really excited about it, actually. It's a really fun project to be sort of moving into and towards.
I think that's so wonderful. I mean, I think the time of COVID is probably perfect because it's allowed you to develop these programs to help so many more people than just the few around you who drove out. I mean, probably numerous, but who drove to see you. But now you can reach kind of a global impact with physicians and, non-physicians, regular patients, which is so wonderful.
And, and that journey for me also includes uplifting other physicians and sharing what they're doing and, getting the word out about physicians that have stepped outside the box a bit and who've learned these principles and who are sharing and teaching too. So, I've always just had it in my heart. They say a rising tide carries all boats. There's this idea that with this sense of community and this sense of connection, we can actually do the changes that we can't do inside the system. We can do them outside the system and provide meaningful content and resources for people that's mostly evidence-based. Ayurveda is another discussion. There's really no evidence for it in a practical way. I mean, the doshic theory has been researched, but nothing certainly published in a big journal that everyone could say, oh, wow, what's that? That has not happened. But from my standpoint, I've just seen it in practice. And of course, it's not anything I invented or something new that was invented 50 years ago that we're still sort of like, yeah, maybe. This is something that was observed over millennia. And, every generation would rarefy it further. So I don't have a lot of internal conflict, even though there aren't a lot of evidence-based longitudinal studies that would tell me. And part of the issue with Ayurveda is that literally every single person is different. It's a very difficult model to study. And I don't know that until we really my theory is that once we get a mechanism for understanding epigenetic changes in real time and detoxification pathways in real time and brainwave and autonomic function in real time and hemopoietic function in real time, then immunity, then we'll be able to see how these smaller shifts actually are like little blips on the radar that grow the trend line into a direction. Right now, we only see things once it's like the Titanic, right? We only see it once it hits the iceberg. We don't see it veering off course or this correction that needed to happen because we can't see the trends enough. We're just sort of looking straight forward. And, then when it meets us, oh yeah, I expected to see you, there you are. And that's how we operate at this point. And so that's my my soap stand, if you will, for the moment.
If you have time, I wanted to talk about two other things. I heard or saw that you might be in a movie. Can you tell us about that, or a documentary?
Oh, that's actually my husband.
Your husband. Okay,
yeah.
Well, tell us anyway.
Yeah. So one of the things that happened for me along the way is that I spent time in North and South India, and part of the journey in learning yoga as well as meditation and Ayurveda. So definitely I've had an unusual life. There's no question. I grew up very standard suburban DC, played soccer, drank Coca-Cola, ate McDonald's. And then I had this very pivotal time in college that just really shifted my awareness about life, which I'm now very, very grateful for. It was a bit painful at the time. But so in that process, you could say I converted, but it's not exactly the best word, to Sikhism. So the Sikh faith is founded in North India, and it has a long-term lineage from a series of teachers and enlightened speakers, if you will, who shared insight about how to live and be present in humanity. And at its core, Sikhism has a genuine love for humanity and a desire to serve. And so that just somewhere inside me lit up my heart. And so I married a Sikh man, and his family is by birth Punjabi. So he has a very particular appearance. The men don't cut the hair, so he wears a white turban, and he has a long black beard, which unfortunately makes him look somewhat similar some of the stereotypes that we have around people that would be threatening or not safe for us to be around. So through much of his life, he's dealt with varying forms of ridicule or bully or various elements of that. And so he was approached by a filmmaker here in Phoenix who was doing a documentary on racism and sexism and bigotry. And so he was pulled in to be part of that movie, which is now getting national release and press, to really just highlight that he's a human being. He works as a chaplain in the hospital. He has a heart of gold. He's one of the most compassionate, empathetic people I've ever met. He was trained as an acupuncturist as well. And so he carries that light of love for humanity into those visits. And it was always just such a travesty to me that someone would lean out their car window and yell something horrible to him when they see him on the street. So he agreed to participate in this documentary to just bring a face and a personality to someone who might be wearing a turban or have a beard or be different or just look different, whether you're Sikh or Muslim or you come from a country where covering the head is more common, which is a large part of the world, believe it or not. There are billions of people across the globe who cover their head for varying reasons. And so in America, people just aren't as used to that. And so that's how that movie came about. And people can find it. It's called You Racist, Sexist Bigot. I believe this is the one you're referring to. And so he is featured in that, and I think it's on Netflix, and it's not on Netflix yet, but it's on Amazon. So definitely check that out. It's really a thought-provoking movie to watch with friends or family.
So it's already out. So
it's already out, yes.
Oh, wonderful.
They had the release, I think 2 weeks ago, a couple weeks ago, they had their big release, and it couldn't be better timed in many ways because it was filmed almost 4 years ago now. And so it's been a work in progress. And they've been building curriculum to help facilitate dialogue, because the film in and of itself will bring things up, especially for someone who's never experienced it or never thought about it. It might give them something to look at. And so they've been trying to develop a discussion or panels to help support people in their transformation if they are interested in just sort of having a different lens and exploring that there's a way to really appreciate each other, that we're much more connected and much more similar than what our larger leadership would lead us to believe. And I'll leave that there, but obviously there's some bigger issues.
We'll let the movie speak for itself after this.
Yeah.
The last thing I just wanted to, if you have time, is to talk about just like a typical day in the life of Dr. Siri Chand.
Oh,
start to finish, like morning routine, like when you wake up and when you go to sleep, and just everything in between that you would.
Sure. So I have never been asked that before, but I'm happy to share. So I have an interesting phenomena. I have always been an early bird, which actually translates very nicely for a morning meditation practice or a spiritual practice of some kind. And in yoga and Ayurvedic traditions, we call it a sadhana. It's a personal reflection to yourself and to, your inner growth, your inner balance. And so I'm usually, I hate to even say it, I'm usually up by 4:30, but not by an alarm and not by any measure other than this internal clock goes off and I'm awake. And so I'll try to dedicate about 45 minutes to an hour to that practice. And there's a sort of beautiful quiet in the morning that I love. It's also a very creative time for me. It's a time when I can have insight or clarity about projects that I'm working on or ideas. And then currently, because I'm working on these more online projects, I'll spend a couple hours in the morning on the computer and I'll be looking at social media, I'll be creating content. Then I don't eat a bigger meal until about 10:30 or 11. So this is also part of Ayurveda. The idea in Ayurveda is to follow the pattern of the sun as the day goes on. So your digestive fire is mimicking the boldness of the sun. So in the midday, when the sun is overhead, is when digestion is at its optimal. And so that time period is generally 10:30 to 2. It's kind of prescribed based on rhythms of the day. So I find for myself, I don't actually even really get too hungry Now there's some data that says it's harder to lose weight if you don't eat breakfast, but I'm not in a weight loss arc. I'm in a, just maintaining my normal health. So for me, I'll do some tea in the morning, a little chai tea or an herbal tea or an Ayurvedic blend. So I do hydrate in the early morning. Usually I have a container, but it's downstairs, about a liter. I like to be sure I'm I live in the desert. It's hot as heck here. It's still 100 degrees here today. So we have to really hydrate to stay healthy. And then I'll try to set aside some time for lunch. And I don't eat the same food every day, but I do try to eat. And sometimes I eat out. It's not regimented. I'm not so focused of, I can't do this or that. And then, so those meals will be a little bit bigger. Like today I had, it's called the 6 taste soup. And it's a combination of flavors that has the 6 tastes of Ayurveda. So it has mung dal and basmati, vegetables, coconut, saffron, cumin, coriander, fennel. It was delicious. Oh my gosh, I was so happy to eat it. It was so good. Little lime juice on at the end. And so then in the afternoon is sort of, again, more working on content and refining and teaching. And then in the evenings, again, I need to eat again, but I tend to eat more in that midday meal. And then in the evenings, my husband kind of chides me. I'm pretty much in a phase of life where I'm very focused on getting some of the things and projects I want to get done. And so I'll work again in the evening for a couple hours as opposed to read or watch TV. And that could be writing, it could be journaling, it could be, and I don't have children. So there's this ability, a lot of flexibility in my day-to-day life to be able to do that. And so as the day comes to a close, I'll try to wind it down. I know that I'm as bad as everybody else. Sometimes I'm on my screens and try to put the blue light blocking glasses on or change the settings on the phone. I try to dim the lights in the house so that that stimulation that's coming in is a little less prominent. And as that happens, then sometimes I'll do something creative, listen to music, connect with friends. It seems to be that, like, right now in COVID, everyone calls me at 9 p.m. It's like there's all this crazy busyness with kids in the home. And so sometimes I'll talk on the phone. But, generally it's a pretty steady rhythm every day. I try to do a walk in the morning sometimes if it's not ridiculously hot. It's just been the longest, hottest summer ever here. And, connect with my husband, and we have a really cute dog. And sometimes I'll watch TV. I'm like pop culture over here. So sometimes people think, oh, you're this or that. I'm like, no, you gotta understand. Like, I am full on pop culture, totally integrated into the grid. I haven't left into some spiritual zone. I'm really, I'll watch whatever's hopping on Netflix or Amazon. So TV is definitely still part of my life too.
I think that feeds into the social connection, right? Like, we have to have, that's still part of the 6 pillars.
Yeah, exactly. And I do go to bed usually around 9:30. I get really pretty sleepy because I'm up so early. And so I do try to I don't ever get 8 hours because that internal alarm clock, I'd have to go to bed at 8, I think. That's just out of the question. Too much happening at 8 p.m. to be going to bed. So, but I usually do try to be in bed by 9:30. And, bedtime routines are important. And I try to emphasize them for myself. Sometimes I'll do a botanical tea. I'll listen to calming or soothing music because there's a lot of creativity and a lot of mental activity, which is true for a lot of doctors. I think they talk even about pajama time where you're home and charting and trying to integrate the day after you've done your evening. So you work all day, you come home and situate your food, your meal for dinner, and then you're still finishing up your work from the day. And this is a big issue. I think physicians have let the system create that as the norm. Is such a travesty because it's really not a long-term sustainable thing. I think, unfortunately, at some point in time, we're going to start to see longitudinal data, particularly for women, that shows higher incidence of disease, cancer, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, early mortality particularly in female physicians, due to this massive amount of things we're trying to juggle without really this appreciation of how to balance that whole journey. So I think that was a big part of my transition too. I said, you know what, I was clearly qualified and really enjoyed the work, but on the other hand, there was just no way to find balance easily within it. And I always say, postmen retire at 20 years, military, policemen, they all retire at 20 years. It's first responders, it's hard, stressful work, and it's okay to have a second act. And so I always like to encourage physicians that, yes, there are physician shortages, but don't let that be the thing that keeps you locked into a situation or a career pathway that just isn't fulfilling, because there are other ways to go about life and to enjoy it and to serve and to give back all the insight and knowledge that you have. So
that's so important work. It's beautiful. I didn't know we would be talking about like physician burnout and physician like burdens overall, but it is important as well. I mean, and that goes back to all the epigenetics that you were talking about. I mean, in lifestyle medicine, they talk about, yes, diet, but stress management and sleep and obesity and all of those things are epigenetic factors. And you're right, we will see those studies in the future, I'm sure. And definitely women are taking on that burden more, just because we feel like we should, I think.
Right, exactly.
That's
like
kind of just the internal way we're programmed as women in general, but it's such an important topic that hopefully we will, well, with your teachings, with lifestyle medicine in general, like maybe we can all bring it all into balance before it's too late for the majority of us.
That's my hope.
Well.
And I think the only way we're going to get there is by continuing to share our personal story, which my story is really valid. Like, I definitely hit that can't go another day place. Like, this is just not working for me. And so it's a really integral part of my own journey, is to really be very frank and forthright. It's like, yes, I could have kept going, but what's the cost at a certain point? And
so was there like a day that you said, this is it, I can't do this anymore?
Yeah, there really was. I talked to my husband, and I had been dancing with it for years, meaning like I had a lot of trepidation. I had student debt, and I wasn't clear how I would transition to earn a living, and just that internal programming of like, you're able to do this well. Why would you not continue to do this? People benefit from what you offer and how you do it. And I, had never lacked for finding wonderful patients who I always enjoyed. But there was just this certain point where I realized, like, the way I was thinking and conceptualizing medicine was just never going to mesh with the way the insurance model was built. And I really didn't have the internal call to start my own practice, like a concierge practice. I felt like the better transition was to make it scalable and affordable, as opposed to going in the direction of, and I'm sure I would have charged a fair amount, $400 or $600, per consult, because they would have been 90 minutes with chart review before or after. You have to account for your time and your expertise and your practice overhead. And frankly, that's what regular practices bill insurance on. These numbers seem absurd sometimes when people try to meet with an integrative provider, but it's really worth it. If you have a complex medical condition, it's really worth it to have a physician take 90 minutes to look at your chart and your records, because really the system will never give you those 90 minutes. You will be piecemealing, visit here, visit there.
Right.
I would definitely
so subspecialized. Everyone, no one, and then the primary care doctor is like supposed to put it all together in 15 minutes, and the system is absolutely broken. And I think the time has come for the patient to take ownership rather than just kind of rely on doctors and heal themselves from within with all of these lifestyle medicine principles. Hopefully, some, and seek doctors like you and myself to learn more about themselves and listen to your own body. Like, that's the best way to treat yourself. Like, and I know.
Yeah, exactly. And the learning curve isn't that steep. That's the beautiful thing. Within 4 to 6 weeks, really profound and positive changes can start that really do illuminate for a person. Like, I can access my intuition and I can develop a mindset that allows me to know how to bring myself back into balance. So a couple weeks ago, I went and I had a really heavy meal. I had a big celebration and I had things I wouldn't normally eat, but it was like an Impossible Burger and French fries and a milkshake. Like, really, I generally don't eat dairy, but it was just one of these like perfect storms. And I was like, oh my God, I felt awful afterwards. And, I always say, don't judge yourself, whatever reason, it sounded good, it tasted good. I had some conditioning around what a celebration should be. I got to look at that a little bit and say, wow, I really don't want to celebrate by feeling awful a week, for a week afterwards. But there's no judgment. It's like, okay, yeah, all right, I see that now. I see that that's how my mind wanted to celebrate based on different eras of my life where, you graduate or you do some big landmark in life, and that's the thing you do when you do it. And so we're always
brought that up because there's always this thought, especially in like whole food plant-based diets or a vegan diet, like there's a little bit of shame, I would say, of like not adhering to it 100%, like bread with no eggs, bread with no dairy, or no cake that has eggs, or I'm not about that as well. That's why I tell people I'm like a 98% vegan. Like, I'll still have bread or cake with an egg in it or something like that.
right. You and I are in the
I'm
same
not
page.
about shaming someone that, oh, you used some oil, so you're not whole food plant-based. Like, that's not what it's about. It's about kind of healing yourself from within, not adhering to some like strict regimented. I mean, yes, follow the plans that your doctor lays out for you, please. But I absolutely agree, and once in a while, like if you eat that and you just listen to your body, how did it respond? And do you need that? Do you not need that? And my patients know I'm an ophthalmologist. So I have bad dry eyes. And when I did go 100% vegan, my dry eyes was really bad. So I actually went back to taking my omega-3s in the fish oil form. And I know you can get omegas in a vegan form, but the potency of the fish oil form was just what I needed. So, and that's what I choose to do for my body. That doesn't mean that I'm going to feel guilty or shamed by someone else that I'm not 100% vegan. I'm doing this for myself. And I don't need anyone else's judgment, and same for other patients. I'm so glad you brought that up. There's no shame in not adhering 100%. You listen to your body, heal from within.
And you can always circle back. It's like, and I always say, I'm not vegan. I'm definitely not vegan. I eat honey. And in Ayurveda, there's a fair amount of ghee, which is how medicine is delivered. And again, that's a whole other tangent and discussion. But there is this quality in my heart of a completely plant forward lifestyle.
Right, plant strong.
Yeah, exactly. That the plants have all this prana, this intelligence and vitality that informs our body how to be healthy and vital. And heavier processed foods, meat, I don't eat any meat, but these other foods are largely probably not in alignment with that. But everyone is a little different. And occasionally you have to adapt and build the program. And I just feel like I never say to people I'm vegan, even though there are niches and kind of ways of being more present when you find these niches. But I've always felt like I have to be authentic. I'm not vegan and I'm not 100% plant-based, and I probably never will be. This is how it works for me. And we all have to find that journey. Some of it is social conditioning. I grew up eating cake. Okay, I want cake. When cake's in front of me, I like cake. I want the cake. And I could apply, I love cake, and I can apply, plant-based cooking techniques. And I do know how to make really yummy vegan cupcakes because I just love cupcakes, little cute cupcakes with unicorns on them. Yes, I love that. But you know, at the same time, we're missing a larger message to me, a group of people who feel, well, I can't do that, so I won't do anything at all. So maybe I'm more of a
Right.
middle lane person, and we all have a lane we're meant to live in. You know, it's like at the swim pool. My mom's a swimmer, and she's always got this conversations with me about the lanes at the pool. It's like a Seinfeld moment. You know, it's like there's this lane and that lane, and we all have a lane we need to live in, and we need to swim at the pace and the stroke that feels right for us, for our body, for our lifestyle, for our family, you know, and not look at the other lane and say, oh, I'm going to compare or compete with that swimmer. That is that lane, you know, that is that lane. And we can all do better culturally and societally in terms of factory farming and, you know, what's happening to the animals. So I do speak out about that because I think it's horrific, and the impact to the sustainable equations are really scary and very important for us to be looking at. So in many ways, there's a spiritual and philosophic basis for that for me as well. So, but we all have to learn and continue to learn. And when we find some new piece of information that shapes or reshapes our unconscious bias, then we do it a little differently. But I think everyone could be always looking at that path of progression and not sort of just sitting in a static pattern or like, hey, this is how I've always done it. This is how I'm going to do it. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I love it. I feel like we could talk for like another hour, but I know
Yeah.
you have to go. And, you know, I value our time and your stories and your knowledge so, so much. I will put links to all of your
Oh, great. Thank
courses with
you.
this video so people can find you and learn more from you, whether it's taking the physician course or the non-physician course, and links to your website. I so, so appreciate it. Thank you so much for all that
Yes.
you're doing and bringing peace to the world, to yourself first and to your family, and just leading by example. I love it.
Well, I'm so grateful to have been invited and look forward to all the things you're creating as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.